I was thinking.
Chris has a phone.
Hi, glad you're here.
Well, you're not here.
No?
You're ahead.
All right. I can go, but
I think what we have to do is we have to put on in the.
That's okay. She's just torturing you.
There is no final resolution yet.
I just don't know that way.
Yes, they're still in.
So we want to make sure we get through.
Even though the design, site plan is approved,
We're gonna do a 10,
not
7, 2.
just to sit here recorded because number one, they have to figure out the sanitary sewer. They have to find the electrical. They have to figure out the description of this alley because there's a gap. So they, is that the order we're doing? They've got to get that. And then they want
10, 7, 8.
this right away. I'll send you the email that shows this better. With a picture of this. We need that 40-foot right away for future terms. Is there facilities in it or public infrastructure? Yeah, there's water line. There's water line, existing water line, and storm drainage here. What about provider? Yes, I don't know what the gas is. I have a better picture that shows all of that. This is something he sent me this morning. This is a something this is from their surveyor. Do they have
Okay.
all survey? It shows all locations of the if we don't want to give them 40, so what happens to their project? We'll have to modify our parking standards to.
I think it will, but this is, yeah.
yeah, it does.
Okay.
And I'll modify our parking.
Is that good? Okay. Not one, six.
Vacate this one out, just to bring it on the plat.
All right, good evening, everybody. I'd like to call the April 26th, 2015 Gardner Planning Commission meeting to order. If everyone please rise and say the Pledge of Allegiance with me.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Start with roll call on my right.
Freeman, here.
Barber here. Nader here.
Climber here.
Quorum is present. Moving into the consent agenda. All matters listed within the consent agenda have been distributed to each member of the Planning Commission for study. These items are considered to be routine and will be enacted upon by one motion with no separate discussion from the floor. If separate discussion is desired on an item from either the Planning Commission or from the floor, that item may be removed from the consent agenda and placed on the regular agenda. Is there any item any member of the commission would like to have removed from the consent agenda? Any item any member of the public would like to have removed from the consent agenda? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion on this item.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
We have a motion made by Barber with a second by Weimer that we approve the consent agenda. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries with all in favor. Moving on to discussion item number 1. No action will be taken for this item. This is for discussion only. Land Development Code. Discuss Articles 7, Building Standards, 8, Site and Landscape Standards, 9, Access and Parking Standards, and 10, Sign Standards of the Draft Land Development Code. Good evening, Chris.
Good
Good evening, staff.
Chris Brewster with Gould Evans. Good to see you all. I'll dive in real quick. We're going to take 10 first, even though it's out of numerical order, because that's where we left off. We were going to do that last meeting. Basically, I don't have much on the presentation for 10, so if you have your draft, go from that. Other than just a little bit to our approach. Again, we weren't trying to dramatically propose anything new with the sign standards, but we did want to simplify and reorganize things. So we tried to land on a few basic sign types. A lot of times sign ordinances go on and define different applications of types, and they start to get cumbersome and start to conflict, and that's where we can kind of get into trouble. So our thought was, let's keep it to a few basic types, and then different variations can fit within those definitions, and then we would establish a flexible allowance based on those basic types that we landed on, and then that would allow us to also regulate the sign allowance, your kind of menu of options, if you will, based on the scale of the site and the building itself. So we keyed some standards a little bit differently to that. All of that should be captured in the sign table, which is in 10.04. It spans a couple pages, and we're going to fix that in the final formatting. We'll get this into something, when we start putting images in, we'll get it into something that makes a little more sense. But we tried to get it all on one table, but then it kind of spilled over onto the second page there. But again, we're taking a lot of pages in your current regulation. It's all text, and we're just trying to really whittle it down so it's easy for applicants to understand what they're allowed, it's easy for staff to administer, and easy for you all to make decisions. So most of the meat of this is in that table 10.02. The other thing we're doing, obviously, is being content neutral, and that's become more important lately, and it actually presents a lot more challenges for cities trying to regulate this effectively, because you find yourself so often doing something that makes a lot of sense, but that's a content-specific one. So the implication of that is we had to be pretty general on some of the sign types, and so there's things that might be going on in your community that we might want to be stricter on some of the standards, but because we're trying to capture a certain type of sign, we have to be a little more broad and general. So one of the things we discussed with staff is, some of those things will become an enforcement issue. Some of them are, allowing, where's our comfort zone on the amount of signage we want versus where do we want to set the bar so that some of the things that just generally go on for, I just stopped at the gas station on the way in, and I was looking at all the signs on the site, and I'm like, there's all these things we aren't counting, we need to figure that out, so just stuff like that you don't observe every day that's going on in a business. So we're trying to account for that in this shortened and abbreviated way as well. And then the last part was incorporating all the recent work that's been done, particularly on temporary signs and things like that have been ongoing issues for the city. So that's a pretty short-winded introduction, and just be happy to take any comments or questions you guys have on if you've reviewed that section or not, or if you want me to go through in more detail, I can do that as well.
I think just in essence of time, we can just do maybe a quick round table here and see if there is a question from any of the commissioners for either yourself, Chris, or perhaps the staff wants to weigh in with, a point that they may see we should focus on. We'll just keep this open,
This is one of the chapters
informal.
that staff has gone through a couple times with
Mhm.
Chris, so he has had our input along the way.
Great. Okay, good. Well, let's just, we can start with questions, Heath. We'll start with you tonight.
Well, one of the things as we're looking at the sign definitions and things, was there analysis or comparison made to surrounding cities and how closely we are tied in what our sign definitions are? Because one of the things I worry about is when we have developers that have, multiple locations, even in the metro or throughout the state, what have you, if they're dealing with different verbiage each time out, if that makes it more cumbersome, or if that's something they're easy to adapt to. But that's one of the things I thought about just as page one thought on that.
Yeah, we didn't specifically go out and look at neighboring cities around here. We have looked at lots of ordinances, both in the metro and all around. I would say that what we do differently than what some communities are doing is this idea of really getting down to a few basic types, I think, and simplifying the ordinance. That's going to be a little bit unusual than what you might find in other communities. I think you're going to find them just refining the definitions more and more. And so we've taken this approach with the city of North Kansas City. Their ordinance was a little bit different because they had they didn't do theirs by zoning district, they had sign districts, so, theirs is slightly different, but we've done a few of these in other communities, but just to say, well, is it like Olathe or Stillwell or Edgerton, we didn't look that far. We certainly can, so if it's people working across jurisdictional boundaries and they might be dealing with different things, that's probably true, and I think this will be simpler than those codes, so that's a kind of a long-winded answer, but.
It's not uncommon to have, and so they understand and can navigate that easily when they're working between different definitions and things.
I think so. We're actually on-call planning staff for City of Prairie Village, and I spent an hour on the phone today with actually the school district on signs, and to say anything with signs is easy for the applicant is not true. But I would say most of the standards for the sign companies, I would say this will be fairly typical and easy for them to navigate. Those are the ones, and even the way you're measuring and the way the allowances you have are kind of well within the parameters of those. And then I guess the other part is where we did get more specific with signs, or when we were trying to do things that were exceptions, so things that you're not going to do a permit for, that's where we might have called out a specific sign or something like that. So then that's fairly typical, I think, of all jurisdictions.
I did have a couple other questions on 10.05, the standards applicable.
Yes.
One of those, item 5, which is vehicles being used to sign the skirt regulation. How do you differentiate, because now it's so easy to wrap a vehicle for advertising purposes, how do you differentiate that from someone who has wrapped a car, drives it home in the evenings, but always parks in the front of their lot in the afternoon? How do you define that through the regulation? Yeah,
that's a great example of one where it'll be an enforcement issue. I mean, where's the community's tolerance for that? And so I think the way, and this I think is current, if I'm not mistaken, or if not, it might be current, and we've tweaked it a little bit. But we did look at this with staff and the technical committee, and I think the thing was, what's going to distinguish the situation you've brought up that's fairly common and no one has a problem with it, to one that you might have to enforce is it being parked and the primary purpose is to get around a sign regulation. So a business that's parking a big van out front right at the edge of their parking lot, you can start to interpret 5 and go, okay, it's time to move that, or something like that. And so with the average homeowner, I think there's a safe interpretation that, well, it's not necessarily parked there all the time, and it's not done to specifically get around the sign regulations as well.
Okay.
That's a new one.
It is a new one?
Yes.
Okay.
And then on 7, I'm just glad to see a height clearance as a tall person. The number 8 was, does that include like the wacky balloons, like the fans and things? Is that kind of what that goes in? So we're saying we're not going to allow that anymore? Because I know there are a couple businesses in town that have used those from time to time.
Not legally, we don't allow them now.
Oh, okay. So that's not a new piece. It, again, becomes an issue for enforcement when necessary. Those were my clarifications. The definitions are very clear, I think, and easy to comprehend. So that part, I think, comes together really well.
Sherry?
I don't have any questions.
Brett?
I do have one. It's on table 1002 regarding temporary signs. Would something like, I'm looking at the very bottom, where it says temporary signs, comparing the only 2 columns. Would something like a political or election type sign, would that come under the category of freestanding temporary?
Yes.
Okay. I notice under the first column, residential, agricultural, and rec districts, it says at least 25 feet between signs.
Mm-hmm.
I know before that's been set at about 70, which I know the other districts are I still see 70 in the next column. Is that something that we think more people than not will be comfortable with? 25 feet is not too much.
Yeah, it's not. I think we were thinking of the typical residential lot, and this is one of those ones where it could be a political sign, it may not be. It could be, we're trying to be as generic as we can with it, so certainly if everyone in the neighborhood did this all the time, it would probably not be a good thing, and you'd want a tighter standard. But what we're specifically anticipating is during election season, and someone has a typical 70-foot residential lot, and they may want to put 2 or 3 signs on there, where can we strike a reasonable balance so they can do that, versus, when would there be a problem with enforcing it at a stricter level? So that's why the 25 is there, whereas opposed to the non-residential, it's a larger spacing.
They are still limited also by that total allowance per linear feet of frontage.
Yeah, I did see that. I'm decent with math, but I did get a little confused with that. Would that further limit it possibly? Is that what you're bringing that up for?
Well, because, they can be 25 feet between signs, but
Right.
depending on how big the sign is,
Sure.
that may also limit the number of signs they can have.
Yeah, and the math works out to, at the 70-foot lot, that allowance gives you basically, I believe it's 12 square feet. At 3 signs, that's 4 square feet per sign. That's a typical election sign, so it kind of works out well for that, just your generic residential lot. Someone that lives on a larger lot, some of those election signs can be bigger as well, and so their allowance could go up with that too.
Okay. I think that's all that stood out to me. The rest looks good.
Okay. And I didn't have anything specific.
Do we want to, just bounce around the flags, the flag limit?
We sure
The 3
can.
flags.
What Brad brought up,
Yeah.
I'd agree.
With the example,
Hold on, that was on, where was that? I didn't call that up.
It's on 10-2, section 1002, it's under the exemptions.
Yeah, C.
C. So I've done a little bit of thinking about his comment. The first is, you kind of hate to default to this, but on public property, some different rules maybe would apply. But the other big point is these are just exempt from getting a permit. So you would hate to be giving someone a permit for flags, but at least there's an avenue to go, well, if you want more than the 3, maybe use that as one of your signs and count it towards your allowance, and you could fly more than 3. Of course, then they're going to run into the trouble of that condition that we saw in
So it's just kind of giving us.
number 8 on the active moving ones. But I think there's a way to get around his problem. I haven't exactly thought about it yet, but my first assumption in his comment would be, well, we're just talking about the exemptions now. The other thought is kind of what I had mentioned in the intro of, well, that's a typical situation. Do we want to draw the exemption at something that's a little beyond people's comfort level, just to account for that rare instance where someone may want to fly more, and kind of let it sort of self-police at a lower level of flags? That's an option as well.
I should view it as almost a starting point.
yeah, I was trying to, because the example obviously was a good one that was provided.
Great one.
Yeah, and I would say one of the things we can look at, and this would, probably we'd have to tightly coordinate with the city attorney, but a lot of times what cities will do is they'll say if it's an official flag, we'll give you more exemptions. We were trying to just say blanketly be
Right.
content neutral, and who cares whether it's a KU or K-State flag versus has the official seal of the state of Kansas on it, or something like that. But there's other things we can look at too, to draw some reasonable allowances to deal with those situations that you're pointing out in the community.
Yeah, there has been a recent case that came down, a Supreme Court case, and that we've covered that in a previous memorandum to the Planning Commission that you've had, that really focuses on content neutrality. So it's difficult to kind of navigate that, whereas before a lot of sign codes, had blanket exemptions for things like political activities, stuff like that. But I think really most municipalities are stripping that out, that content base out.
Right.
because of, case law that's come down on that.
Maybe it's best to leave it at 3.
I would like, yeah.
One thing though, and I might have missed it as I was reviewing, but was there anything regarding the size of flags? And what the maximum size of, does that qualify as a 10%? I didn't see anything specific to a flag itself. Or did I just overlook it?
No, you didn't. I'm looking through because I know we talked about it, and I think it might have been something we were gonna capture in definitions, which we do at the end, and you guys haven't seen that yet, so that might be, that's where I'm thinking we talked about it. I'll make a note and make sure we
Yeah.
tie up that
Something
loose
else
end.
to that, just, it came up obviously with Perkins, which it didn't become an issue except for the height of the pole itself, but you don't have anything in place and you don't have any way to enforce if you want to set some maximums in there.
There is a kind of a self-imposed limitation because of the height limitation
Sure.
on the pole. The flags themselves are rated by the flag companies to be on certain size poles or mounting brackets, however you want to describe them, for wind load and other safety considerations out of IBC. So you can't put, for example, a Perkins-sized flag on a 30-foot pole. It would tear the pole out of the ground with wind load.
Sure. Is it
So-
possible then, as we look at regulations, to take that and build a regulation that says flags should not exceed the recommended IBC?
IBC code.
Yeah, IBC codes for, I mean, that might be the safest way to put it in there that way.
Well, I don't even, you shouldn't put that in there
No.
because, I mean, we've already adopted the IBC standards and so.
Oh, okay.
And so you can't have a load on whether it's a monopole or any
Okay.
other type of structure that would compromise it.
Sounds like, okay, perfect, sounds like it's actually covered through that. That's the last thing I had.
Okay. I don't have anything else specific. We can move on. We're good with 10.
I wondered if we could talk about that off-premise sign thing, that Brad brought up,
We can.
just to clarify what you guys went on that one.
Will you reference that?
That was, item 11 in his, comments, which
Oh, I see.
relates to,
Was
I don't know what that is.
on, 10.0.5,
I think,
right? 10.0.5, number 11, is that right?
yep, that's the one.
Any sign with a commercial message shall be located on the site of the commercial activity,
Yep,
which is his comment being item number 11 would prohibit you from placing garage sale signs or mattress fundraiser signs anywhere except on the actual property that the sale is taking place. Makes it so you cannot advertise your sale or fundraiser effectively.
But in the same token, it also prohibits Roundhouse from putting a Roundhouse sign
Right.
on every corner of the city,
And-
so.
Technically, I mean, any sign with a commercial message, if we're stripping everything out to make everything quote-unquote neutral, who's to say it's commercial and who's to say it's not?
Yeah, that's the one, gray area that municipalities are trying to hang on to from the recent cases, because that predates the recent cases, that you could always make a distinction between commercial and non-commercial, and it was viewed as less protected, and so there's a lot of people debating whether that still exists or not, that distinction. But to solve the immediate point, one of the thoughts I had was, perhaps, you know, the charitable things may not be looked at as commercial, or another way to account for the garage sale situation, we could change it to any permanent sign with a commercial message shall be located there. So temporary signs for a temporary event, or even garage sales, as long as you meet all the other temporary sign standards, and have the permission of the private property owner to put them there, they would be legal. It's still, a lot of the garage sale signs you see that are in the right-of-way would still kind of be one of those illegal activities that you tolerate till an extent until you get tired of it and you go enforce it.
I would be comfortable with adding the permanent.
Permanent. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly, for bringing that up.
And one more thing on the electronic message signs and his point about why are we limiting their size, I thought maybe we should talk about that.
Yeah.
It's from the 10.06C4.
Right. And those are fairly, they're just fairly typical planning terms that are in ordinances, and that actually the sign industry, they may not like it, but they're fairly used to dealing with it. And the real reason behind it is just to, the electronic message boards, especially, they're so new, it's just trying to limit the extent and size of them, so to go, well, we're not going to let you use all of your signs for it's just a way to control it at a smaller scale. The same with the changeable message, trying to get things that are more permanent and aren't changing all the time, and to reduce the scale of them. There's no magic to that number necessarily, but it just does, going back to the intent of the ordinance, is trying to reduce potential impacts from signs that can cause a little more disruption, I guess. And, if your community's tolerance is different, a different number could easily work, or it could be, you could draw it at the limit of the sign, the whole sign allowance for that category.
I'll follow up on the electric message signs. As we look at number 2, how's that done in a strip mall or a downtown district that doesn't, it still has a lot, but it's not differentiated between lots? How's that determined?
Well, keying it towards lot, that gets to one of the things we've done is started to scale the amount of signs to the size of the lot as well. So in the downtown, you may get a lot more of them, but they would have to be a lot smaller too, because their sign allowance isn't going to be keyed towards you get a per sign. It's not, the sign is this big, it's based on your building frontage or your lot size. So it would reduce the scale of them in a downtown. Strip malls, they're difficult because they're usually, well, I don't know, I guess it can vary all over the place. I want to make the assumption that they're going to be one large controlled lot, but you might have different situations. I don't know. Okay, so they would basically get one. It could probably be larger than most of the others, but they would get one on that situation too.
But in that, like if a business had the ticker sign in their window in a strip mall, that would be a signage, and if there was already a digital signage in front of the lot, they wouldn't have access to it.
So that kind of brings up a good interpretation thing, because we did think through that. So some of the things that go on in a window, we're going to be exempting from that. So if you look back at 10.02D, to the extent any of the signage meets that requirement, it's covering, it's inside the window covering less than 30%, they won't have to get a permit at all, and that'll just simply be allowed.
Good with 10. Let's take a look at 7 next.
Okay.
Since that was a pretty big one.
I have a bit of a longer presentation for 7, since there's a lot of new and different approaches in it, and I think you may have seen this before. It was some of the same things we talked about with our advisory committee and some of the presentations we gave in some of the public open houses as well. But I'd like to at least run through that just to kind of reintroduce us to the new, different approach. But basically, we started exploring the idea of regulating more by building type, specifically because the planning industry is kind of going in that direction. It deals more with some of the impacts people care about from development, the scale and form of it. And more specifically for you all, we started down this path to look at in and around downtown when we noticed that you didn't have a lot of good zoning districts to do either infill residential or to infill some of the commercial sites in a more pedestrian-oriented mixed-use kind of format. This building type approach seemed to make a lot of sense. When we started looking at it more, we thought it probably had broader applicability, and so that's what I'm going to run through. So the other counterpart to the building type, setting the kind of form and scale, back up a minute, I guess your comprehensive plan is very strong on emphasizing the design of the public realm and the public rights of way and things, development relating to it. There's very strong policy statements about that in your plan, improving the image of the community and those types of things. So that's another reason for exploring this approach. Because the counterpart to that is when we then look at regulating site design and setbacks and things like that, it really flips the emphasis on what we care about to that building to streetscape relationship. So the idea of regulating frontage types and for different contexts came about as well. Whereas your ordinance now, most of the standards are just based on pure setback and buffer. In other words, the further back the better, the more landscaping buffer the better. When the plan is suggesting, at least in a lot of contexts, you're trying to relate things more and integrate them more. So that's the overall strategy to this approach. So residential building types, the housing choices is a big policy in the plan for different contexts within your community, but also then the idea of mixing different housing types within neighborhoods was also present. Certainly not everywhere. This isn't saying we're going to go down into a residential single-family subdivision and plop a bunch of different housing types, but the ability to develop new neighborhoods with a mix of types is present in the plan as well. So this table, it was in our initial draft, and we somewhat kind of reformatted Article 7 to go building by building, but this table is a summary of all of the residential building types and their development standards. We're going to break them out building by building in the final draft with imagery, and you have the shell of that in front of you on the draft that you got for this meeting. But I'd like to just walk through some of those. So the ones in green, except for the building heights, they're a little messed up, and we need to correct and fix those to get them more in line. But basically, the ones highlighted in green are all your existing zoning district standards. So everything that you had before is still there, and if they match up to the existing zoning districts well. So everything that you could do in the past, you will still be able to do under this development code. What we're adding new are the types of housing that have kind of been called the jargony term of the missing middle, that you go from single family to then all of a sudden everything's multifamily. Well, when you look at multifamily, it comes in lots of different sizes and shapes, and so it's those smaller scale multi-unit buildings that would fit well in and around downtown or in and around a mixed-use area that we wanted to enable. So those four that are highlighted in red are the new types. The reason your current regulations don't accommodate those well is because it's based on density. And so the easy thing to think of here is a 6,000 square foot lot, which is a pretty small lot, that has a 3 to 4 story building on it and may have anywhere from 6 to 12 units in it. The density number on that lot would be, somewhere in the 40 to maybe even 80 units per acre if you just did a density calculation. Yet when you look at the scale of that building, it would fit in well on any of these blocks, and so you don't have a zoning district that says we allow 80 units per acre. So this is a way of enabling that, of regulating more by building type. And then what we did with those new types that we added in is we looked at what was the city's least used residential zoning district, and it was the R4, which was currently set up for a different format of residential anyway. It's set up for condominiums, but it wasn't mapped, if at all, it wasn't mapped very extensively, so we thought that there's a district where we can make some changes to, and it won't have any impact on zoning districts currently mapped in the city. And so let's kind of convert that one into a mixed density neighborhood zoning district that you could use out in newer development areas, or that you could do for strategic infill in and around downtown, and that's where all the new building types are enabled. And so what we're left with is it basically leaves your most used residential districts intact, and it adds in the new R4 that has the more flexibility that's called for in your plan. Talk a little bit about frontage types. I know because even in Brad's comments, he had some things on some of the buildings where he was questioning whether you would want that standard or not. One of the things we're looking at trying to do is, again, the more of those, the more density and more compact development you allow, at least in our opinion, I think your plan would support this, the more important that neighborhood streetscape is. You want to get the kind of the amenity and value out of really crunching in a lot of housing types and making the neighborhood more cohesive. So the big you know, what people want are garages and driveways and convenience, but the more when you do that with really dense and repetitive housing, you end up with a neighborhood quality that doesn't match what you're shooting for. So again, the idea of keying the right frontage type to the right housing type is what we're trying to do there. He made a comment, I think, on that the townhomes wouldn't be allowed, and that would probably be the fourth one over would be the most applicable example of that. And so I'll walk through each of the frontages. And again, what we're trying to do is to keep everything that would be allowed today allowed, and only on the new things that you're enabling, perhaps greater density, greater development value, you know, raising the standards on. So the buffer edge frontage is what you would typically find around a garden apartment complex. It doesn't integrate well with a lot of things around it. Everything's more internalized. The amenities for that project are more internalized. And so at the street, what they do is they buffer and screen and landscape. So you still have that ability in there. More suburban residential frontage, the lots are 70 feet or more. There's not necessarily a problem with everyone having their own individual driveway and 2- and 3-car garages, and the neighborhoods are set up for that. When you start getting into the new lot, that neighborhood lot that we've enabled, so we're now going below your standard lot, so the frontage might be as low as 50 feet, and the lot area might be as low as 6,000 feet. That's where designing the front can be more important. And we're not saying you can't have garages. If you look at the neighborhoods that have that type of density and hold value, some of the things you're talking about in your plan, they just do it differently. They have single access to the back, or they have a shared drive system, or something else that keeps that neighborhood streetscape feel intact while still providing that. The sweet spot is really that 60 to 70 foot lot, because you can get arrangements like it's shown on the screen there. And then, again, getting more dense. So the townhomes, which was specifically his example, what we're trying to do is, particularly on the more dense building types, but also we're trying to relate this to, if you remember back to Article 4, we're also enabling new street types as well. So the street with the wider sidewalks, street trees, and on-street parking, you'd want to limit the curb cuts on those. Perhaps the project he was referring to could have either done that, maybe, and improved the project, or there's ways we can look at that in certain contexts, maybe that frontage type isn't important, and the more suburban one with garages might be important. So the idea is you could mix and match these frontages to building types. So perhaps there is a suburban townhome frontage type that we look at to get to that, his point on that one. And then lastly, arranging the buildings around some type of civic space is the last one that we're accounting for as well, so the courtyard frontage. So that's a quick tour through the residential types. Again, with the idea that most of the most used districts should remain roughly intact with little or no change, and we're enabling new things in that R4 district. So we took a similar approach with the commercial buildings, again, starting in and around downtown, how we needed to fix that, but then recognizing that your let me just go through it here. CO and COA districts were intended for the smaller scale, pedestrian-oriented neighborhood centers, yet all the standards were more car-oriented, you know, larger setbacks, buildings removed from the street, things that were hampering developing at a really small scale. So, again, taking all of the general building types, and this is another one where the heights are messed up, and I think Brad may have caught this in his comments, the general commercial ones are supposed to be matching your existing height limits at 45 feet, but they're not currently. But the idea that all of these should remain virtually unchanged from your current zoning district standards, and so everything that could be done can still be done. And then adding in the new types that are basically geared specifically for more compact, walkable development, the live-work, small commercial storefront, a mixed-use building type, and a small industrial workshop building type. So those things that can have a lot of different things going on with them, but they relate really tightly and to the street, and therefore they have a higher design standard on their facades and their site design. And those are mostly geared towards, again, the COA, and the C1. So any new neighborhood centers that are shooting for compact walkable development, and as well as in downtown, those buildings would be allowed by right. And then what that leaves is the most widely used commercial and industrial districts basically have their same standards intact. Frontage types as well apply here, and I won't walk through all of them, but in certain buildings and on certain streets, it will be more important to relate that project and site to the streetscape than it will on others, and so gearing those standards more towards those situations and trying to give flexibility, but also giving the tools to say when the city has invested in a valuable streetscape, they have the right to kind of demand that you have a better relationship to it as well, and that's what we're trying to key it on. That's kind of the quick summary of Article 7, and then we can go back and discuss any specific questions. And I should mention the other thing we did at the end. I forgot because we did this after this kind of presentation had been set up. The last section, 7.07, is we're starting to. There's a third document out there, Gardner Design Standards, and in fact, your last meeting you discussed some of those with the application that you reviewed. We're starting to weave those back into this. So what we did was we repeated the design principles as the intro to that section. So those are all the design principles that the Gardner Design Standards are on. But we started to try to recategorize some of the substantive standards, the ones that had some real concrete objective standards, under some categories that matched better with the building types. So that's what we're attempting to do there, and this was the first time staff had even seen that, so I'm sure we'll be talking with them on, whether we're on the mark or not, or how do we make sure we aren't losing important things in the design standards that we need to get in there. But the idea was at least that we tried to get all the things that were less vague and subjective and that were more concrete and get them keyed to the appropriate building types. I know from our advisory committee, and I think Brad might have flagged this as well, there was one of the questions was on the material standards, why are we requiring that materials changes happen at inside corners or they wrap around the side of the building? And I will say that's a common standard that we see a lot, and the idea is to make buildings not feel flat and fake and just have things pasted on the front of them. And so it's an attempt to get it at better quality design. Does it always automatically lead to it? No. Is something that doesn't do that, does it mean it's not quality design? Not necessarily either. So we can keep looking at things that give flexibility if that's been a continuing problem with you all. But I know that was one that our advisory committee especially wanted looked at.
Start with questions. We'll start with you this time, Brett. Do you have anything?
Nothing right off the top of my head. Maybe come back to me, but
okay.
I'm okay for right now.
Okay. Sherry?
I really don't have anything.
Keith?
No, I was pretty comfortable with the way it was all drafted out.
Okay.
The clarity to it.
Yeah, I thought the clarity was good, and just in your point, Chris, regarding the I know Brad brought this up as well about the corners and why do you change materials. And I personally, I think it's just like you said, you're gonna have a flat building, so I think it's worthwhile to leave in here. I didn't see anything else that jumped out at me. Was there anything from staff?
Yeah. Unfortunately, yes, I'm going to take up some of your time.
That's all right.
Just one technical thing, Chris, is we no longer have development standards relating to a zoning district, right? They're all related to building types now?
Yeah, that's what we're thinking.
Okay, so there's a few places where we need to take out where it says it's related to the zoning district.
Okay.
I just wanted to make sure that was true. Also, we had a few general standards pertaining to all residential uses in our current ordinance, things like having permanent foundations, minimum dimensions, minimum roof pitches and eaves, required garages and carports, and interior parking space and things like that. And I didn't really see those anywhere in the code, I don't think. I don't know if you remember where we might have.
No, Yeah, they aren't in the draft right now, I know that, like the minimum size for
They are in
residential.
there?
No, they're not.
Oh, they're not?
They're not.
Okay. So I don't know if that's something we don't want, or,
Wouldn't you want minimum? I would.
And those are in your current?
yeah, they
each
are.
zoning district, or?
No, it's, I think it's in like, R1 or R2 district. It has some design standard or something, I think they're called, just in that chapter,
Okay.
just for that one district, I think.
Well, one of my thoughts is that for, some of them sound like they would be generic across all buildings, and they probably go in that 7.07 section.
Okay.
Others may be specific to building types, for example, the minimum size standard. I know we tend to stay away from some of those, because they could have some other implications that what's the real public interest behind having a minimum size standard sometimes can be a concern. But with the building type approach, it might be very easy to say, well, that applies to the standard detached house, and the ones that we're trying to enable below it that are smaller scale, maybe have a smaller standard as well. So that would be my only fear on the minimum standards, if they start to conflict with some of the things we're trying to do in the more compact neighborhood settings. But we can key those probably to building types.
And what do you think about a minimum roof pitch? I don't know if that's just trying to get away from flat roofs, but I know there are houses with flat roofs, so.
There are, and there's some, that one's hard to say again, you're starting to get into taste, and the architects in our office would tell us that that's generally a bad idea to begin with, minimum roof pitch, because there could be all different designs where something makes sense. And I guess the question would be, if everything that's being built with that minimum pitch, if that's, we certainly didn't want to change a standard that's working well, I'll put it that way, so if we can put it in.
I personally think we could allow design flexibility on stuff like that, but. Right, that's a
Yeah.
good point too.
Well, and the other thing that we might be able to do, because it's really a massing and scale issue, so there might be something that fits well in section 7.07 on, because typically if you have a very steep pitch roof, you want it to sit lower, the eaves to sit lower so that the height ends up similar. And if you have a very low pitch roof, you want your overall height to be down. So there might be something that we can put in there that's more of a guideline on how to do pitched roofs well, and it would seem to fit appropriately more in 7.07.
I'd agree.
One of the things I did forget to hit, we've started down we'd hope to have the formatted draft to you for this review, but I shared with Kelly that when we're doing graphically oriented things in a Word document, it crashes a lot. So we're having trouble getting the formatting right, but we were able to get a few of the sections. So this is what the building type pages and the frontage design pages will look like when they're finally formatted. So the idea is it should be fairly user-friendly and give people a good idea of what we're shooting for on some of these different strategies.
Yeah. Were there any comments or thoughts on Kelly's suggestion regarding some minimum standards put into 7.07? Or do we keep it generic and leave it up to taste of the architect builder?
I just mainly wanted to point it out to Chris, and maybe he can make some suggestions to you next time. And
Okay. I would be good with that.
I did have some considerations on the table that relates the different building types to the different zoning districts. I thought maybe there were some changes we might want to make based on your discussion about the different land uses we allow in different zoning districts, and then trying to think what kind of buildings would accommodate those land uses. So, for example, the first one, I wondered about, this one I wasn't sure, Chris, what your thoughts were, but estate houses that have a minimum 1 acre lot size. I wasn't sure that we should allow those in the R2 and R4 zoning
Yeah.
districts, which are supposed to be like moderate density settings or compact walkable.
Right. So we struggled with that one too, because, if you remember in our early draft, we said, well, let's allow them in a limited format, so let's have one of those hollow boxes there that says, this isn't the typical, housing format for this district, but we're gonna allow them in a more mixed setting, we'll allow them. And so, the way to think of these is, in sometimes neighborhoods that have a wide range of housing types, you might have a house that takes up half a block or more, and it's mixed in with, right across the block are, a lot of smaller lot homes. And so that would be the only reason for having the box checked. But we certainly wouldn't want to have that district used for exclusively that, because then you've lost what you're trying to achieve with it. Why we ended up going to just a filled-in box was we had trouble finding, well, what criteria would we allow it or limit it, or how would we state that? And we didn't, so we filled the box in saying, well, kind of, maybe the market will control it and it won't happen, and you just won't see it everywhere. Because the value would really be in putting in more homes than fewer, but what's wrong with a larger one sprinkled in? So that was our thinking behind it. The other way to get around that is to go, well, if someone wants to do that, one, they can use a planned district approach anyway and mix and match several different zoning districts. So, for example, if we took, because I share your concern, and I was actually leaning more towards just unchecking those boxes. And then if someone wanted to do that within a neighborhood context, they could certainly use the R1 district or the RE district in association with that and do that broader range of housing as well. So that would allow them to allow the districts to track more exclusively with their predominant housing type.
Yeah, because I thought being in R3 was probably fine, since that's a garden apartment district. Seems like you had bigger setbacks and things going on, and maybe it would fit better there, but
right.
It just, to me, it didn't seem like it would fit in R2 and R4.
The other place you might see it, and again, this is it's, whether it's checked or not won't prohibit this, but the other place you see that type of situation where is if it fronts on civic space, like maybe a higher designed street or some kind of park. A lot of times those end blocks might be the bigger homes, if someone were to do a neighborhood of that type. And again, were they to do that, they could accomplish that through using two different zoning districts or doing it through a planned district.
Or
so it might be
rezoning.
simpler to take it out. Yeah, rezoning.
Todd?
No thoughts on that one? Okay. Most of the other ones I had questions about were adding them into more zoning districts. For example, I thought that we should maybe allow row houses in the R3 and C1 districts. Because right now the C1 district is described as including supporting accessory residential uses in a compact walkable format. And I know that row houses are often found near downtowns or incorporated in downtowns. But it seemed like all we had right now was apartments and commercial building types, so I thought maybe that would add some more flexibility there. And I thought they'd be similar to garden apartments in the R3 district, so that's why I thought.
That would make sense?
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that.
You say R3 and C1?
Yeah.
For all?
Yeah, let's make that change.
And then I wondered, and this one I don't know, Chris, would small garden apartments in the R2 district be appropriate, and is there a way to kind of like limit those in a way that they'd fit in?
We could take a look at that. One of the ones that would concern me is that the garden apartment is keyed towards, that one's purely density based, so that's your existing standard. So unlike the ones that say minimum lot size, that one has a per unit lot size as well, based on that density. So the bigger the lot got, the more intense the project could get. Now, those projects tend to internalize more when that happens, so that's why if someone wants to do a 100-unit apartment complex, they have to get a large chunk of land. And that's the exact reason for all those other building types, because then when they do that, it becomes impossible to kind of relate it to things that go around it, and they just internalize more than externalize. So my thought is it probably wouldn't fit in well, but we could take a look at those numbers on a sliding scale to see where and I don't know where your R2 districts are mapped well enough to know if that, do you have lot configurations where that might be a problem or not, but we can look at it.
Okay.
But the other two, I think it's easy to see your point and go, yeah, let's just make that change, but I might want to look more at the garden apartment one before we did that.
Mhm. When we had talked about the use table, the planning commission had talked about allowing some different large civic uses in the R3 through R5 and the CO, CA, and rec districts. That might be kind of a little excessive with this building type as the way you have it, but I wondered if adding the larger civic building type in at least the R5 and the rec districts, you already have them in the commercial and industrial districts, but I just wondered if that might be appropriate.
In R5 and which other?
R3, R5 and the rec. We'd have to change the land use table to take some of those large civic uses out of some of those other ones, because you had said they could be in R3 through R5 and CO and CA, but I thought at least maybe in the R5 and the rec districts.
I can see the rec district, certainly. Can you think of an example where we want one in a residential district? I'm trying to think of anywhere that I can relate to that would be an example where that'd be appropriate. Oh Lord, I mean, then I guess it's a definition of what the scale is between the two.
Yeah, and to me, that's one where those projects might be, particularly if it's not a public entity, they might be on the scale where a rezoning might be appropriate with it anyway. But
I can see it in the rec districts as part of those lands that might become available, but in a residential, I'm having a difficult time envisioning where we want that to be granted without a zoning change.
And you're talking about like mostly if it's not privately owned, or yes, privately owned?
I think it has to apply the same to both,
Okay.
whether it's privately or publicly. Because as
Do you
far as
want
the
it
guidelines
or-
go, it's a building, I think, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So you're speaking from the table, the prominent civic, right?
Yeah, the prominent civic building type, but then when we were doing the land use table, we had like large civic, I think we had a large civic land use or something. We can go back and change that use table to not allow the large civic uses in those residential districts, but it somehow just needs to go together. I don't know if you looked at the different land uses when you were putting together the building type table.
yeah, originally, yeah, but we'll revisit it for sure. Because I know both have changed, so we'll do a comparison and see if there's any reason. My initial instinct right now is no, that we could probably, because those things are intended to be, some of the larger civic uses were intended to be more of a kind of destination type scale activity, that we may not want to do that, but I'll look at the table and come back with a more clear thought.
Okay. What about allowing the live-work building types in the R2 and R3 zoning districts? I think that those districts went, in the description mentioned complementary uses and support services, so I didn't know if that would be a complementary thing since it is kind of limited in size.
I would be okay with that. Does that have any, like, density impact, like we talked earlier on the, what was it? The garden apartment? Maybe it was the garden.
I think it'd be mostly just adding, like, typically one dwelling unit along with the
Yeah,
commercial.
it's basically like, that building type is, typically think of row homes, but with a commercial frontage on the ground floor. The live work doesn't mean, that doesn't mean you, so typical residential, you can always do, you have the home occupation thing that we covered last meeting, and then also someone with a home office and just works out of their home, they're not gonna be, they can exist almost anywhere under those other provisions. So this is dealing specifically with a building type that's designed with a more commercial frontage on the ground floor.
Oh, go ahead.
No, go.
Well, I was gonna say, I try to think of this in terms of what I want that in my neighborhood where I live, and I tend to think no. I mean, I guess it'd be nice to have Sally's Boutique right down the street from me and somebody living on top of it and the apartment would be fine, but I just can't picture it in my neighborhood.
You live in R1.
Yeah. Well, you wanted to see it in what, R2 and R3?
Well, yeah, I was just suggesting
Right.
R2 and R3.
Yeah.
Like, well, what if it was a little grocery, small little general store or something with an apartment above, or...
That was one neighborhood commercial.
Oh, I mean, they can rezone, but I'm just talking about maybe like the little corner store of some kind, or...
Yeah,
It's just a thought.
I don't know.
and to do that in infill and existing situations, to me, it's all about, what context does it go in. So the neighborhoods you can picture it going in would be, well, perhaps on a corner of a busier street that might be a difficult site already, or a street that has a more higher traffic or pedestrian-oriented feel. There'd be nothing wrong with, turning orienting the building towards that and doing it. Whether you have that opportunity in a lot of your R2 and R3 districts kind of depends on how that streetscape and public realm is designed. So it probably would have a lot more applicability in newer developments or in some of the infill or neighborhood areas, but there's certainly nothing wrong with, the more the better. It's just to have, are there unintended consequences we haven't thought of, so.
Well, I think we probably already have some, like, residential conversions where they convert them to businesses downstairs and maybe apartments above, but...
Mhm.
Does anyone feel strongly anyway?
I don't feel terribly strongly either way. If someone was to want to do that sort of development, they'd have the opportunity to, like we spoke to before, request a rezone. One of the other districts where it's actually allowed use, and which is probably a more appropriate thing to do rather than all encompass, ask for a rezone for appropriate use of that land. It's probably where we're going to be safer moving forward, make it even better planning from that point as well. So I don't know that we do want to try to catch all of them. I think we want to leave that to where they come to us and say, I'd like to do this, and we consider the rezone application.
Guys can agree? Yep. Okay. We'll leave it as is for now.
Okay, Brett had mentioned adding, small commercial pad sites in the rec district. I think that was because we talked about small, gift shops and concession stands and park areas.
Mhm.
I would be fine.
I'm fine with that.
You said Brett?
Can you elaborate a little more on what he might have meant? I did skim his comments, but,
I was thinking that if we did that, Chris, could we put like a 10,000 square foot maximum lot size, like in that district, just to, so it wouldn't be like a big commercial pad site thing
Sure.
going in.
Is it normal to encourage, business development in your rec district? That, I don't know, it seems to always be a public thing versus a private thing, and those are always gonna be public lands for rec purposes, or it's gonna be private enterprise already, and they won't be governed by the same things, because they'll have had to rezone, so I'm just wondering if it's actually appropriate to do that.
To me, it depends on at what scale, similar to what we've talked on the other instances, what scale are you zoning at? And then the other thing is and I apologize because I don't know your zoning map that well, but a lot of times what communities do with their rec district is anything that becomes public, even though it might be allowed in other districts, if it's a park or whatever, they just automatically, well, we gotta zone it to something else and zone it to rec. So to the extent the rec district is serving as that, it's things that are just publicly owned. I think you might have other avenues to accomplish what he was talking about. But if it's just a broad district that has a more, public amenity flavor to it in general, and there's private land holdings within there, then I think it's probably appropriate to go ahead and add that with conditions to it. So it does kind of depend on how that district's applied. I would say if it's all just public anyway, that we would look to something else to do that. Kind of based on your.
Well, and I think that's exactly the point. I think, Michelle, you'd have to correct me, I don't know the land map, really very well at all, but is there any private land that's designated as rec land right now? It's all public land. So I think.
Well, the thing is, most of our parks are zoned for residential.
Right.
Or ag. We don't, off the top of my head, I can't think of anything that's zoned for the rec district.
Well, I was wondering that same thing as well.
You know, I think we need to probably take a step back and really think about what we want that rec district to be doing.
I think that's exactly kind of where I'm leaning at, is while there might be an opportunity for that private-public partnership with some of these things, I think we're putting the horse ahead of the cart to do so when we don't even truly have a rec district that's easy to identify. Well, I don't think we wanna pull things in when we don't have anything that's really very well specified at this point and have kind of future uses planned out.
Right, and, you know, you could either go in the direction of, okay, that's what we would like our public parks and things like that in, or you could go in the direction that you're looking at it as more of a commercial type recreation, but then, you know, there's ways that you can leave that more of a recreation, but not start adding all kinds of commercial stuff into it.
Right.
Or if you had a rec district, you could have next door some sort of commercial district that would support it. You know, it's one of those things of, do you wanna have that situation, or do you wanna keep adding commercial type uses into that district?
And I think.
That's my concern, is really, what are you wanting that rec district to be doing and used for?
If we go back and look at the use table that we had before, and this is kind of what was probably driving the discussion, was, you know, we had things like micro neighborhood retail permitted as accessory uses. We had all sizes of assembly, cultural, and public service. We had schools, cemeteries, they were permitted. We had accessory food and beverage. We had recreation and entertainment, indoor and outdoor, permitted in the rec. So, you know, we could change that. We could say those uses are in other districts. All I'm saying is if those are gonna be in a rec district and we are gonna eventually have some land zoned for that, then we need a building type of some kind to accommodate those things. So, that was why I was thinking that the pad site might be appropriate type of building with some limits. So we might need to, like, kind of go back and look at that approach between the land use table and the building types too, for that district.
I don't feel like making a decision on that. I see both sides this evening. don't feel strongly to add.
No, I don't.
So it seems like you guys are wanting to limit commercial building types in residential districts,
Yes.
so,
Yeah. I'd agree.
let's see.
Seems to be consensus.
What about the, small industrial workshop building type in the agriculture district to accommodate like some of the agritourism and animal care and light processing uses that you had come up with? And then kind of the same thing in that rec district and then also in the C2. I thought in the C2 district, that small industrial workshop format might accommodate limited artisan manufacturing, the entertainment and recreation, the vehicle equipment repair, and commercial office uses that you permitted in your land use table, for instance. It's I think Chris has set it up with a size limit for the small industrial workshop building type, and so thought it would be kind of innocuous, at least, as a building type to accommodate those kind of uses in those 3 additional districts.
In which 3?
Ag, rec, and C2.
C2 makes sense.
I can see ag.
We agree.
The only problem when we use an ag is, when we have those areas, those islands within town that are still zoned agricultural, that then would allow them to do that under their current, which is certainly not the intended uses and probably not the way that we want them to do that. You have to think about some of that land that's by the Casey's on Gardner Road and some of that, I think, zoned ag still for tax purposes, so that would allow them to do some things there that normally wouldn't with the rezoning. So I actually think we probably don't want to change that to ag zoning.
Is everyone comfortable with C2 addition?
Yeah.
What about rec? I keep leaning back to leaving rec off the table.
Yeah.
It seems to fit
We're
in
gonna
the...
consider rec, we'll probably wanna focus more on limitations. I know we're all kind of not fully comfortable.
Add to C2 only?
I think that's fine. There we go.
Do that, Kelly.
That's all I had on the table.
That's it?
Okay.
We don't have other questions?
No.
All right. Move to, number 8.
Most of Article 8 is built off of the idea of all of the previous articles, and again, based on your plan, where we're trying to focus a lot of the design effort on reinforcing the public realm, private development relating to the public realm, that the landscape and design amenity goes in the streetscape through the street types. It goes in the open and civic space types, both of those in Article 4 that we've covered. And then it goes in the frontage types that we just talked about in Article 7. So rather than taking your landscape and site design section and just asking for open space, as a lot of ordinances do, and say we want 10% open space, since we feel like we've already accounted for where and how you want that open space, this article is viewed more towards, okay, now let's give you some landscape standards for where and when you put that. So we incorporated the current standards for planting requirements for the most part. There probably are some tweaks here and there, but that's table 8.1. And then for those instances where relating to the street or having some open and civic space or having a well-designed frontage aren't going to cover you, we still have the ability to require those buffers and screens that you currently have, and so that's table 8.2. And each of those have a planting requirement and allocation with that. We did update some of the plant species and also incorporating some of the research and landscape architect in our office did on street trees, and so we want to, that's at the end of that table 8.1, there's a reference to that document, and we'll include that as an appendix to this, but it's a improved list on what types of plants, from street trees, ornamental trees, and shrubs, basically, which ones are hardy, perform well in this region, and don't present a lot of problems. A lot of times what he's found is, especially nursery standards, they sell the quickest growing, cheapest one because it gives you an immediate impact, but they often don't survive very well. So this list is a good resource that gives you a lot of options on plants that perform well. Someone, I think it was a citizen, maybe, so that's good that citizens are reviewing it, did catch an embarrassing typo in Table 8.3 where we referred to at least 2 geniuses on the trees. So we've got that corrected. But again, the idea there is the tree diversity. Ideally, where you want it is, because having all of the same types of trees on a single site or block is a good thing because it has a good design element to it, or at least, so I'm speaking for the landscape architect in our office here. I'm not qualified to do that, but this is what he would tell you. But then you should get your diversity by varying it at a larger scale. So, the reason we had Elm Street, Walnut Street, Maple Street was because those were the streets that had those street trees, and you had diversity at the larger scale, but at a smaller scale you could have a good design feel. So that's kind of what that's trying to get at. The more trees you have, the more diversity we're looking to, but certainly on a small scale you could do them all of one type. Plant specifications. Screens and fencing. I know in Brad's comments, so probably we need to focus on one particular element of that, and that was the side yard fencing. He brought up a point of prohibiting the 6-foot fence, and that wasn't what although this looks like it has the effect of that wasn't what we were intending to do. I think we were marrying a few different standards. So I did have some thoughts on, quickly looking at his comment, that's on page 8.4 in B. And usually what those standards that limit the size of fences along those corner lots is trying to do is to prevent something that's real close to a sidewalk from looming over it. So your current standard, I think, says nothing within 15 feet, or no 6-foot fences within 15 feet of that. Our thought was, well, you could have a 4-foot fence right to the line, or perhaps a 6-foot fence set slightly back, and it's currently being keyed towards that property line, but a more appropriate standard might be to key it towards if it's next to a public sidewalk. Because if you're at a property line where there isn't a sidewalk, or the sidewalk's still a good distance off from that property line for whatever reason, it may be okay to have the 6-foot fence even right at that property line. So we've noted his comment and concern, and we're going to look at a way to kind of fix that, unless any of you have specific thoughts on why your current standard was there and what we need to keep. We can take that into consideration as well, but just want to throw that one out there for discussion.
I'd agree to see something different on the fencing. I tend to lean towards Brad's comments on that. So I'll ask the other commissioners for their input.
Okay.
Yeah, Chris, you could work something up a little bit differently. I think we're all in concurrence with Brad's comments.
Okay.
Definitely understandable, if you're going to want to put up a fence to keep the folks in the street out.
Yeah, and my thinking is what we would typically do is anything, the 4-foot limit is a good limit for front or side if it's real close to the sidewalk, but side, if it's not, there's really not a problem with it going up to 6 on the perimeter, and so we'll try to look at filtering something that way, I think.
That would be great. Do you have anything else you wanted to point out real quick?
There was a couple of his that I hadn't had a chance to look at. He pointed out a height discrepancy particularly in non-residential, and I think he mentioned in industrial districts, why would we want to limit it to 6? And I don't know if we missed 2 different standards, but if there's a higher limit in non-residential, we're going to want to look at that. And then he also had a comment on materials of if we were trying to prohibit cedar fences, and that wasn't the intent at all, so there might be some interpretation we've missed or something we forgot to incorporate that we need to, but I have notes to take a look at that too, if you have any specific thoughts on that.
If we have any specific thoughts here
Sorry, that's,
concerning the fencing? Sherry?
No.
Okay. We're good so far, just addressing, what we've talked about so far tonight. Outdoor lighting, I think there were a couple of things pointed out. Do you guys have anything on outdoor lighting? Do you have anything for us, Kelly?
No, not on this one.
One question I did have is we look at the landscape requirements, what defines large tree? We had some definitions of planting, but what defines
Yeah.
large trees?
So that's gonna be, that, species list I was referring to has them categorized into
Okay.
large and ornamental or small. So when we incorporate that, we'll make sure all that terminology is linked and get that in probably the definitions as well.
Okay.
What does caliper mean, since we're on there?
Caliper is the landscape architect's way of measuring how large the tree is at planting, and it's basically I believe it's the diameter across the trunk at a certain height. Circumference, okay, sorry.
Okay. Got it.
Question?
And a lot of times it's measured like 3 feet off the ground.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I don't know what it says here.
Okay. Doesn't really say, just 2 or 3.
Good, all right, I think we're good on 8. We are coming close to, time. Do we want to try and tackle 9 really quick?
You looked at it?
All right. Take a look at 9, Chris.
Okay, I actually didn't have that in the presentation, so I'm
Oh.
just going from my draft here, but, so, most of the parking standards, I think are, and I've been wrong on this before, so correct me if I'm wrong, we've rolled over most of the parking rates and ratios because a lot of times there's no right or wrong to those, it's just trying to get you in the ballpark of a correct number. But what we often find is municipalities kind of erring on the side of too much.
Right.
And then particularly the retail industry, they have no problem with that because the more parking, the better. It's sort of an odd scenario where they don't necessarily care about using land use efficiently. It's viewed as that's dollars, and then in really car-oriented environments, that's probably true. So what we tried to do was to at least start with that base number and not question whether that number is right or wrong, but then start to give a lot of flexibility and credits for things like when one of the street types that we did incorporate and address new into the Article 4 subdivision standards was having on-street parking, and the more of it, the better. So anytime you have that, those could be credited towards a parking requirement. The credit for bicycle parking, to the extent you have it. We also did add in a requirement because you do have a strong component of trails in your community and a trails master plan that's going to go even further, that if you're within 1,000 feet of that, you would have to have bicycle parking. So we added that in. The ability to do a reduction in parking based on a shared ratio. You currently have that in there now, or is that something we added new? We incorporate that almost into all of our ordinances, and what it does is it allows people to kind of use there's a industry standard on, sharing at different peak times, and we just want to give them another opportunity to reduce the parking count down. There's some provisions specifically to deal with parking in downtown, an area where you want to manage it at the largest scale possible. And then once you get to that right number, and do we have enough flexibility to allow people to whittle that parking down, the real kind of public interest becomes, okay, where is the parking going? What's the impact of that design, either stormwater-wise or on the visibility and viewpoint of the community? So in which cases do we want to buffer it from the street and consider it good? In which cases do we want to require it to be setback, behind the building, and so that's what the sliding scale on the size of the lot versus the location of the lot is getting at, those kind of moving the puzzle pieces around in different circumstances. And those are new things that we introduced into your parking standards that currently aren't in there.
How did you, I had a question similar to Brad. What is a bicycle parking stall?
So, yeah, I read that and I started thinking, okay, well, we can define that because we know what that is. I think that's probably something that, stall is probably the wrong word. To me, it's anywhere where you can park a bike. So a bike rack,
Okay.
bike, anything. And so I think we want to clear up that term, but I don't think we want to define it because I think you need to be open to go, well, we're going to, we've got this
Pole.
rail, yeah, we got this rail here, and we're going to make it clear that you can park bikes there, and then there's our spot. So, so I would offer that. We'll make that clear that that's what we're talking about, and maybe even give a couple examples.
Yes.
And then that also plays to, I think he made the comment of, well, the one per unit, when we are requiring it within 1,000 feet of the trail, the one per unit might be excessive, and we certainly didn't intend it to be that way, and I think it can be easily met by just having something designed into your landscape or hardscape that can account for a place to park bikes, and it'd be a simple check the box thing. So, but we can clear that up.
Okay. And then I also had a similar question as Brad. Within C, let's see, that is 9.03 C 5. Under deferral of parking space requirements, where it goes back and forth between the planning commission or the city council, whoever is charged with granting final approval, and it goes back to a site plan. Well, if memory serves, I think the planning commission has final approval or denial of a site plan. It never goes before city council. Is that correct? So can we strike out city council? Any other questions you guys have?
I did have a couple. On the table, 9-3, under sidewalks, my only concern there was that our minimum widths are ADA compliant, and if they've been measured against that when building that table up.
My immediate answer is going to be yes, because I think the ADA requirements are somewhat minimal. The other thing is, just because we don't say it everywhere doesn't mean that it's still not applicable everywhere where ADA might be triggered. So a lot of times cities want to say, well, let's just say it, but the problem is then you get into having to say it everywhere, and we want to try to avoid that. But I'll definitely look at those standards and make sure. I think usually all that's required is a 5-foot clear path, but I'll have our landscape architect look at it and verify and make sure I'm correct.
Then on the 9.4 required parking table, specifically the set that is on page 9-5, are these similar to what we have in place now? Some of these seem a little excessive. The 1 for 3 occupancy for fitness or exercise studios seems to be like a lot of parking. So I just wondered if these were all based on what we currently have or standards of what they are, because some of them just seem maybe a little bit out of whack. I'm just thinking about Gardner Athletic Club. I don't know what their occupancy is. I would expect it to be somewhere in that 60 range. And I don't know if they have 20 spots down there in any way. And I know they'd have downtown exceptions, but you think out to Anytime Fitness the same way, their occupancy would be the same. That seems pretty tight. That one was the one that stuck out really far to me, and then even the restaurant general 1 for 3 seats seems, is that the standard? My question is, this
Yeah,
the standard?
I
for
do
the-
know both of those uses. So the standard is often what you see in a lot of cities is, well, let's just pick, and that's where I get to, it's somewhat arbitrary, and you kind of balance out based on your mix of tenants. But 4 per 1,000 is what you often see in commercial, and there's some interesting articles on where that numbers come from, and there's all these manuals are supposed to have the answer, and they're kind of made up as well, and the cities copy them. So there's a guy who's actually researched all this and has a lot of data on it. But, so the 4 per thousand is kind of the rule of thumb, and again, it's for places that are very car-oriented, and they're for places that are kind of planning for the peak time. But again, that per thousand is normalized across a whole bunch of different uses. So I do know that both the fitness and restaurant, they're way above what the typical use. So a lot of times when we do see them carved out specifically for uses, those numbers aren't out of whack from what you typically see. It doesn't mean they're not too high, because again, it goes back to what's the city's interest in regulating this? Is our goal to prevent a parking problem from ever happening, or is our goal to manage parking at a larger scale and kind of reduce the impacts from what it might have on development? So we can look at it, and I mean, I'm not one to stand up here and argue for a higher minimum parking by any means, but those numbers aren't atypical. But we can look at those.
I guess too, we'll see the site plan as it comes forth.
Sure, of course, yeah.
I guess having a guideline, but I'm with you, it just seems excessive. Anything else here?
No, my last question is in regards to employee accommodations, but that's in that last line of that table with the generally, that's generally, and goes, with the number of employees.
Yeah, and the difficulty on that one, we try not to do them per employee, because what's your benchmark? So how many employees do you have? I don't know. I mean, it varies day by day, so it's hard to enforce that one. And, a lot of times what we see when someone's doing a site plan based off that, they're going from a hypothetical number to begin with and trying to just arriving at something they think they need. But we can certainly look at that one too. I do know, I think Brad had a question on why 0.75 employees rather than per one employee, and I will say that's just it's two things, either assuming not everyone's going to drive, or it's assuming that different shifts have different fluctuation, and you don't necessarily want to plan for the max shift versus so it's just another reflection of trying to reduce it, but we can look at both of those numbers.
Right. Sherry, anything? Brett?
Good.
Do you guys have anything else for us?
I don't have any.
All right. Thank you very much, Chris.
Sure.
This evening. Appreciate it. Okay, I'll give you guys just a quick heads up. I believe we'll be having the comprehensive plan coming back to us for the sub-area discussion either in the May or June meeting. It's sat at council, and I'm going to come back to us for reconsideration, so FYI. Having nothing else on the agenda tonight? Nothing from staff?
Are we meeting again before
Oh, yes.
our May meeting?
We will be meeting May 12th, special meeting.
Here? Or senior
May
center?
12th meeting is at the senior center at 7 p.m.
Great.
And just jump in,
Yes.
y'all got one of these. Everybody's members of the American Planning Association now. You've probably gotten emails already. You have a ID number, and they should have included information on how to reset your password. That allows you to log into the website and access a lot more than what the public would be able to allow. There's a lot of information for planning commissioners, some information you otherwise couldn't access if you weren't a member. So that's something that's kind of new that we've been working on fighting with. But so you'll be members from now on.
Great. Thank you, Michelle. Okay, not seeing anything else on the agenda tonight, no other discussions or questions. I entertain a motion to adjourn for the evening.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second?
Motion made by Barber with a second by Freeman that we adjourn. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? He is adjourned.
Didn't see you.
Oh.
I didn't know if you remembered that. I didn't know if I should replace something in the binders. Oh, I'm sure.
It'll come up. My recommendation. He had a great presentation. They really came to action on that. So that's why it's coming back. He loves to do
Recycling?
You're not buying lunch or
What?
something?
Yeah, go to Timberlake.
Talks about how.
I thought you were going the week before.
You want paper or you want Barbara?
Some folks maybe,
They're the ones who, like, every tree has to be.
I honestly don't know.
That's what we try, tree.
I know where that was a question.
City foresters, who would like, the workhorses of the tree world. Exactly. And then the landscape architects want to design a beautiful landscape, and so they all, and I was like, wow, all these different trees, completely different perspectives. So he had all of them rate all the trees on certain performance criteria. Longevity, ease of maintenance, all these different things, and so then that's where the tree list came from. So.
Yeah, because, he should also meet with Robert, who is, we're kind of in the middle, we don't have a director of Parks and Rec anymore, because Jeff went to the county, but, Robert was the one that suggested we might need a master street plan.
So,
And a tree bank.
so, Robert Whitman, obviously, he was just on, we're going through this in Prairie Village right now, because they're trying to do design standards for homes, because there are lots of tear downs around the Prairie Village shops, so everyone's focused on the home, the building scale of home, and we're helping facilitate that, because that's what everyone's talking about, but we're trying to slowly commit to it, and it's all about, well, the older style homes are better, and all this, and we're kind of like, really interesting. If you've never been to that neighborhood, the value of those neighborhoods are, it's the street trees and the connection to the shops, and they have no protections for that, and we're kind of like, they check any building with any kind of basic relationship to the street, that's the value, so we're starting to map the streets based on proximity to the shops, based on how, like a 1 to 5 rating of the tree canopy, and then a 1 to 5 rating on how the building relates to the street, is it a garage dominant building, or is it a porch dominant building? And so we're gonna just do the value of property values, and try to show them that the value isn't in the homes that you're building, it's all in your streetscape, and how your building relates to the streetscape. So, to the point of your guys' conversation,
Public works is all that.
I don't want to minimize those things, but the value that it creates is off the charts in terms of the small investment. So he's the one to come facilitate that conversation. He's really good at it. He gets all
Well,
five
maybe
of
I'll
it.
get his contact information and send it to our Robert.
Yeah.
And they can,
Sure.
because they're gonna be doing their part, right?
Okay.
Okay, but so was there any, I didn't know this was actually, are we not requiring residential homes to have tree plants?
No, we are,
Okay, well, I did.
quite a bit.
Really? But I didn't see it on that.
Well, it's in,
Is it something else?
yeah, it's in the land use.
Yeah, it should be in there. The one where we finessed it was, is it required to be in the right of way or not? And we were advocating, yeah, you want, your tree should be in the right of way. But we knew, we knew that this was kind of an ongoing debate of work, but we at least wanted to allow for it to count.
Yeah, but you've got internal trees that you're requiring.
Yes,
and-
I didn't study it before, but I'm almost certain there's not.
Yeah, there is, there's several.
So I didn't see it.
So on that idea of a master tree plan, so he was showing me Overland Park's website, and he lives in Overland Park, so he showed me his neighborhood.
GIS code thing, and then volunteers went out and clicked, that species clicked boom, and it was all boom, they had it all logged.
Cool, we got a grant writer here.
We had such a good class in urban forestry, and that's what we did, is just kind of an example of how to do that. I mean, we had an urban forester on board, like, for a city, it's a wonderful thing to do.
Hey, we got a
And, really keep track of all that stuff. I worked for Spring Collective Farm when I first moved to the city. But anyway, yeah, but, again, it was like, okay, we're in design, we have all these, thunder payloads, and they're gonna go bad, you know, they're gonna start rotting out there, you know, so everybody gets one. Whoever, you know, whatever design you do, everybody gets one.
Everybody gets
Not how you do it.
Right.
Well, it's
Yeah,
supposed to be.
Well, thanks for coming, Chris, thanks.
Yeah.
We'll just maybe talk about some of the questions I have.
Yes, especially yeah, let's set up a time to do that, don't wanna get all on the residential business. I know we typically try to skirt over the minimum size, but we can.
Well, those aren't a big deal, but I
I didn't
got
wanna
some other questions.
bring that up.